Hi, everybody, and welcome to our latest edition or our first edition or we're doing something different here. This is Build the Era. I'm Dr. Laura DeVoe. I'm one of the advisory board members, and I am here with Jeanne and Jonathan. They are both on the advisory board as well, and they are experts in transportation. I am not. I am a front end user. I know how to pump my gas. I sort of know how to fill up the tire on my bike and on my car, but I care about this stuff very much. And so we here at Build the Era are super excited about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, otherwise known as BIB. I was hoping
it's had so many titles.
I know. I was hoping for a sexier title.
Yes.
We'll go with BIB. And so we asked you all to send us your questions. And tonight, Jeanne and Jonathan are going to answer them. And I am also going to maybe do a little stump questions here and there. And if you have not joined Build the Era, go to buildtheera.com and sign up there. We have a weekly email. We are very good about not overwhelming your email box. We have ongoing events, and we are building our state infrastructure so that you, once the bipartisan infrastructure bill is passed, and all the other things that go along with it, this stuff doesn't end. And we're going to get to that, but we need your help to get things going in our states. All right. So I'm going to start with a question from the interwebs, from Reddit. This is from a user called I Had More to Say. And I Had More to Say says, can you ask the experts to explain the grant process? So Jeanne, you are the grant experts. Can you talk about that and let us know what that means?
So there already is some standard setups for grants. And then if you go back a decade or so, there was a grant called Tiger, and it has evolved into something called Bill. No, it evolved into Build, and now it's called Raise. And that's a basic infrastructure grant. There are a number of other grants. There are SIG grants for transit, and just a variety. There used to be something called Infra. So I think they'll keep the structure of these grants, and the overarching criteria probably won't change. They're very solid, except in the last grant, the last Raise grant, which was the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with sustainability and equity, added those two words, sustainability and equity. And I think you will see that in everything. And the way the grant process works, there's always more need than they have the money to give. So it's a competitive process. You will need your legislators on board. So your legislators, especially Congress members and senators, will have to be in favor of this project. It has to have a lot of momentum already leading into it. But now you'll have to talk about sustainability and equity. And I suspect that will be in everything that we see. As Pete said, safety is the reason we do everything. So you have to address safety, but social equity and sustainability are criteria. And they now have some tools that you can use. The environmental justice. It's a website, and you can look at a variety of demographics at your fingertips. So they're trying to make it also accessible so that anybody can put a grant together and talk about social justice.
Great. Can you just, because the closed captioning is going to screw up, I'm sure, the actual letters of the grant programs, can you just spell out what the current one is and what the most previous one is?
So the previous one was the original one under ARA, the the Recovery Act, the initial Recovery Act in 2004 was called TIGER, Transportation Infrastructure Generating Economic Recovery. So it's all about recovery. Then the next set of, then they revised the title to Better Utilizing Infrastructure LD, build. But I thought it had a build. It had a Trump's flavor to it because the first word was better. So they renamed it RAISE, RAISE, which is Rebuilding America's Infrastructure. And the last two letters, most important, is sustainability and equity.
And you also have the infra grants
Infra.
as well that are still around, and those have added is the same components to them.
Great. All right. And so the next question, I'm going to send it over to Jonathan. This comes from Twitter from @Sparkula. Is there some good news for cyclists in the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
There really is a lot of stuff for cyclists to be happy about in the bill. There's a change within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And that's basically the main program that funds surface transportation that the state DOTs get funding for. And there's some things in there that give states more flexibility to actually increase the money that they're giving to what's called a Transportation Alternative Program. So that's your cycling, that's your walking, you know, that sort of thing. So basically non-vehicle modes of transport. So
Does
states
that
can
also
increase
include-
that.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, but does
No,
that
go ahead.
like, you know, in Portland, Oregon, there's the electric kind of buggy system or whatever it's called.
Mhm.
Like, does that include that, or is it really just person on a vehicle?
I think it's kind of more, if you're talking the Transportation Alternatives Program, I think you're thinking active transportation,
Okay,
basically,
so-
you know, walking, biking, that sort of thing.
Scooters, that kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah. And so it allows states to have more flexibility and actually, you know, put a significant amount of funding toward that if they wish. So they've given states that ability. Congestion mitigation air quality funds, or CMAQ, those can now be spent on shared micromobility. So that includes your bike shares, your shared scooter systems. So, you know, CMAQ funds can now be put toward that. And there's a lot of things in the bill for research, especially for countermeasures to protect vulnerable users, and also research into promoting cycling and walking. And the MUTCD, there's been a lot of controversy about that and a lot of talk about that, but it's in the bill that needs to be updated to actually protect vulnerable users. So that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And the fact I keep calling vulnerable users is another big piece of this, because in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which if you watch some of our videos, I went through the safety components and the Highway Safety Improvement Program. That was kind of a big thing for states for safety. It now defines the vulnerable road user and who a vulnerable road user really is, and also safe systems approach, because that's something that Federal Highway is using. A lot of affiliated organizations are using this and coming on board with this. It's kind of the answer, you know, the US's answer to Vision Zero, so to speak. But it's more of a systems approach and looking at a bunch of different things to make sure that the whole system is safe. But a vulnerable road user safety assessment also has to now be part of a state strategic highway safety plan. So that's something new. Again, we talked about that a few webinars ago, but you know, every state has to have a state strategic highway safety plan in order to figure out how they're going to spend their highway safety improvement money. So that's a big thing. And now there's a new program for competitive grants for active transportation that the secretary is going to be responsible for. And then finally, you have this new Safe Streets and Roads for All program. We'd mentioned Vision Zero. Well, now there's actually going to be $5 billion for the life of this effort, for the life of this legislation, put toward funding those Vision Zero programs. And those, of course, involve a lot of cycling, you know, as part of that. So making sure that cyclists are safe as well as all vulnerable road users. So there's a lot in there. It's kind of sparse throughout. There's nothing really there's no title of cyclist or anything like that, but there's bits and pieces in all of it for cyclists to be happy about.
So the cyclists are woven through. So
exactly,
if you are a cyclist or a cycling enthusiast, you will be happy with this bill. I know an unrelated thing that was entered as a proposal, I don't know where it's at right now, is Senator Markey, and I believe the senator from Hawaii put in an electric bike. But that's not part of the bib. I think it's separate. They're looking at some way to allow for people to get some kind of tax credit on purchasing of electric bikes. I don't know if you have anything on that.
I've heard of the amendment, but I'd have to look more into it to give a better answer.
I threw you a screwball there. So we'll follow Jonathan on Twitter, and I'm sure he will put it out there. So Jonathan, share your Twitter handle.
Will do. Yes. I am at JTREA81. So you can follow me on that. And Jeannie, feel free to share yours as well.
Exactly. Jeannie, what's yours?
It's at Acutanza, JACUTANZ.
Thank you. All right. And mine is at Deveau, my last name, DEVEAU, train, like in choo-choo train, one word. Okay. And it had nothing to do with Bill the Era, but it was always in there, the choo-choo train. All right. We have this next one will go to either one of you who wants to take this one. This is from Lori B. Elliott on Twitter. I read that the bill has less money for climate than we all had hoped for, but there is quite a bit that will be discretionary spending up to the Department of Transportation to award. There are possibly then the climate focused projects could be awarded money if they attract the attention of the Department of Transportation. Who would like to take that one?
I'll take a short stab at it. As I mentioned, you'll see sustainability criteria in all of the grant applications. And if you can make your case that you are pushing the envelope on sustainability by adding active modes, by encouraging transit, by reducing congestion, by putting in even like roundabouts, your project will receive favor. So that's part of it.
Okay. So let me ask this follow-up, and then Jonathan, maybe you want to take it, is that,
Sure.
The way that this question was phrased was about getting the attention of the Department of Transportation. But if you kind of put it into the grant proposal paradigm that you guys have put out there and say, you can't get a grant unless you hit all of these items. So it has to include sustainability. It has to include equity, or am I misinterpreting that?
Well, that's the thing that's going to be the criteria. But so far it's been, you've seen some things come through, and some things it's kind of, with any grant program, states can write things a specific way to get the funding.
Yeah.
But there are still, that is still a consideration for the funding to be, awarded.
Mm-hmm.
But just like any grant program, it's going to be up to the discretion of the people who are, reviewing the grants.
Right.
There's a lot of matrices in these grants. So certain portion, each state has to get a little bit. It has, there are certain, can't exceed a certain dollar amount. There are a lot of little criteria, and your project has to, you're working on this great idea, and it might not fit right into that specific cookie cutter, but it will encourage you to think about those things. For example, I was working on a project, and we know what the long range transit picture is in our region, so we couldn't we're going to put a bus on our project. We had to say we're going to put non-motorized modes, but we also added things about we'll look at low impact development. We'll look at making sure we address historic fish passage. We will build with renewable resources. So we actually went so far as to say we'll consider a green road certification, this sustainability certification. So it's carrots and sticks again, and the grants are carrot to say to attract you to do some of the best things, and those are the projects that will bubble to the top. The ones where people are actually doing the things that are the right things to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the grants and things that were applied for too. I mean, some of these projects were in the pipeline, so I think this round, I suspect there to be a little bit more scrutiny on things, based on the criteria and the expectation that's been placed out there now of where the department is supposed to be going with these discretionary grants, from the Biden administration. So I think you're going to see that. There's also a new grant program in the bill now called the Healthy Streets Program.
Okay.
And that's going to be specifically to provide grants for cool pavements, porous pavements, expanding tree cover, basically mitigating those urban heat islands, improving air quality. So that's a new program that's been established. So there are things like that in the bill that will be, this discretionary grant programs that will specifically call out climate, actions. And I want to point out too that there's actually a section in the bill that says climate change.
Right.
So, for a lot of people who are saying we're not making progress, I mean, you just got, enough Republicans to agree to put climate change in a bill. Yeah. Think of where we were 4 years ago, and now think of how drastic, change that is.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's incremental. And hopefully, I'm a big proponent of once you make people aware of something and they start seeing it in action and they go, well, how come I can't have that? Wait, hold on a second. Why isn't our community doing something like this? It actually makes people, think differently and act differently. And I think that's great. So speaking of this idea of, enjoying where you live. One of the things, Jonathan, when you were talking about putting in tree cover and making sure that you're making those heat islands in the middle of these urban locations less awful. And it helps not only the climate, but it also makes it more pleasant to live there. So we have a question via email. And if you ever want to send us an email, go to buildtheera@gmail.com. So one word, build the era. This is from Bill, and Bill has a question. I used to live in Carmel, Indiana, a relatively small suburb of the Indianapolis metro area. Although I've only lived in that area for a year or so, Carmel was one of my favorite places to live. When I lived there, a car wasn't necessary for most of my daily activities. The most unique thing about Carmel was how they designed the road-related infrastructure in the downtown. Carmel spent a lot of resources on things like roundabouts, walkable streets, bike roads, and complete streets. Their investment in these infrastructures leads to increase in foot traffic in Carmel's downtown. Would it be possible for the BIB to make similar investments in walkable infrastructures in cities in the United States?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to that. I mean, we mentioned kind of the grants that are out there for active transportation. I think that's a big thing. And also the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, making sure that, these Vision Zero programs that these cities and towns are trying to take on are successful in making things safer and more comfortable for all users. Mm-hmm. So I think, those aspects of the bill are going to be, transformative for a lot of communities because they'll now have the funding to back up their efforts to make places a more walkable and safer place to live.
Yep. Fantastic.
I also think, I was going to say just that there, as Jonathan mentioned, there's a backlog of projects that are bread and butter, highway, intersection, interchanges, things that are what are considered traditional infrastructure. But as these grants encourage people to move, the criteria right now are very soft. Try your best to give us a sustainable project. Try your best to give us, an equitable project. As these projects move, as the grant cycles move up, they're going to have a lot more data to say, here's the threshold you need to be at. So I think Pete will be pushing on performance measures as he does in a lot of things. And I think that's what we're going to see is this is how sustainability is defined. Right now, a lot of people don't know what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. It's to be determined, or we're still working toward it. But as we see these projects move ahead, and we're going to see that, like the project, the neighborhood restoration, the reconnecting neighborhoods.
Yeah,
a small project. We don't know what it is right now, but once it's, once they give a couple of awards and they can show you what that means, we'll see a lot more of that.
Proof is in the pudding. When you actually see it happen, people go, oh,
I want the 25-minute neighborhood. That's the, the topic of everybody wants a neighborhood that they can get.
And that's the thing too, is after the fact, it's in the legislation and the bill that, agencies and the people who are applying for these grants, they're going to have to prove what they did and report out on what they did and how successful it was.
Right.
So, it's not just you get the money and do something. You've got to, with any federal grant program, there's got to be tracking and, there's got to be some results there for the money that's spent.
Yep, absolutely. I have a couple questions for myself. The first one is, I'm an educator, so I'm wondering, is there anything in here about school buses? Anything here about transportation for kids? Anything like that, you guys?
Well, I will start with this is the largest investment in transit that we've seen. Transit's in a tough place right now. It's it's really struggling to come back post COVID, and as hard as transit agencies have had the most need for bolstering to restore, keep their service where it is. A lot of transit agencies are really, looking inward to see, are our numbers going to be restored? Will we be able to provide this kind of service? And yet this package, maybe it's not as much as people wanted for transit, but it's a ton of money for transit. School districts, they want to get their kids to school safely. There's a lot of them will either say that they will walk or give them a bus ticket on the public transit, or create these bus systems that are with their own school bus drivers and school buses that are very expensive to operate and can be somewhat convoluted. If it's compact, it's okay. But I think what you're going to see is one, and I bet Jonathan will talk about safe routes to school, school and getting kids to school safely. But the Biden administration in the initial American Jobs Plan, they looked at replacing the fleet of buses 20% in chunks of 20%. So this is the first 20% of either no or low emission vehicles. That's good for kids. And when they buy these new buses, they'll be safer. They'll be more, they'll have all the bells. So what about safe routes?
Yeah, that's been a program that's been around for a little while now, and it's included back into this. And basically, it's a way that communities and agencies can apply for funds to, essentially create sidewalks, create infrastructure so that, pedestrians and kids have a place to safely walk.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of places that just don't have the infrastructure, and this program allows them to create those areas and create those sidewalks and other things that are needed to make sure that kids have those safe routes to school.
Yep.
An opportunity to walk instead of be driven.
Yeah,
exactly.
I live in a city where we do encourage that, and we're very lucky in most of our city. There are some places that they need to fix, but most of our city, you can walk safely on a sidewalk to school, and it's a change maker. It actually is really great. And during COVID, especially, well, now we're still in COVID, but when we were in this hybrid schooling situation, I was really happy to see, because the number of kids allowed on buses was reduced to try to keep less kids on the bus. it was so nice to see kids taking scooters and bikes and walking to school. And it felt like the mid 70s for a minute. Like they just kind of left the bikes out in front and just went into school. And it was a wonderful thing to see. Um, in the bill, another thing I want to talk about is we see a lot of people on Twitter, and I know Jonathan, this is one of the things you like to chime in on is mileage-based user fees. And that what is it that people should take away from the bill right now about mileage-based user fees? What does it mean? I know we've had these conversations in Build the Era events before. And if you missed any of our events, go to our YouTube page. And all of our events are recorded. They're all up there. So Jonathan, what do we need to know about mileage-based user fees?
Well, mileage-based user fees have been around for a little while now. Oregon was kind of the place where the whole effort started, and they're still using it. They're still piloting it, but there are a bunch of different organizations, both on the West Coast and the East Coast, that are looking at different applications of mileage-based user fees. But this is the first effort that you actually have a national pilot. So that's pretty big. It's not anything like this is going to suddenly replace the gas tax. No, this is a pilot. This is basically asking for volunteers in different states to try this out and kind of see what the results are, because there are still privacy concerns, there are still kind of implementation concerns, equity concerns. So, but this is the first national effort. So, I personally, I think, mileage-based user fees are the replacement for the gas tax. I think that's the way we're going to head. I think there's a lot of support in Congress for still the user pays system. I know that that's controversial within itself, because a lot of people think it should be, just government provided, and we shouldn't have to seek user fees. But I think that the consensus, in Congress, that there is a consensus, is that they want to keep it a user pays system. If you have to do that, well, then mileage-based user fees really are. And Secretary Pete's talked to this. He said, if you're keeping a user pays system, mileage-based user fees make a lot of sense. Not that we're going to mileage-based user fees, but if this is the direction we want to head in, this makes sense. So now we've got the pilot. Now we can actually, take a concerted look at it and have the funding and infrastructure, so to speak, behind it.
Right.
So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, I think, it has a strong future, but it's nowhere ready to replace the gas tax. And I think that's a big thing that people need to realize too, is that this thing is still being funded by the gas tax, and the gas tax, if we don't replace it with something, we still have it. It's still inequitable. It still isn't sufficient. So we've got to replace it with something.
And there's a gap. There's going to be a gap, right? So we have to figure it out.
And the other thing too is if we go to EVs, and if we're going to, we're raising fuel efficiency standards. That was just mentioned today by President Biden. But if we're going to do this, then we're going to blow a hole in the highway trust fund that we're going to have to fill. So, how are we going to do that? Well, that's a potential way to do it.
Okay. No, this is all great. I learned so much from you guys. I have one last question for both of you, which you didn't know I was going to ask. So get ready, buckle up. What are you the most excited about when the BIB gets done? And I know it's going to mean, like, we don't know all the details that are going to actually be out there, but you've been working in transportation long enough. What is it about the future of this moment that you are the most excited about?
I will say what I am most excited about. One is getting something done. Really, we've been lapsing on infrastructure for a really long time. And my mother I was going to watch the Olympics, and I wanted to watch this movie called Walk, Don't Run from 1964. And she said to me today, Jeanne, did you know that in 1964, when they had the Olympics in Tokyo, they had Japan a bullet train? Yeah. So I just want to catch up on infrastructure. But the thing I'm most excited about is those two things, sustainability and equity, that they're included. And in states as progressive as mine, we are going to have to get on our feet and, really work hard to do the things that this bill is asking us to do, especially in terms of sustainability and equity. And I cannot say how much climate change sustainability is long past due to be built into infrastructure. So I think it will. I think it will really turn heads and force, push us in the right direction. So I'm excited about that.
Cool. Jonathan.
I'm excited that it's infrastructure year. I mean, we're not talking infrastructure week. I mean, this is, for someone who's been in infrastructure, you see it, the ups and downs, you see it. It's been an afterthought for so long. And here we are, we've been talking infrastructure. It's been in the news. It's been everywhere. Everybody is now aware, or well, most people I would think are now aware of infrastructure, what it is, how it affects them. And, you have people ready to take action on this that probably had never given it really a second thought until it was front and center presented to them. Yes, this is how it affects your daily life. And you've got the perfect messenger in Secretary Pete. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better messenger on infrastructure. That was like a dream come true for everybody involved in infrastructure, to have him, front and center and just being everywhere, talking about it. It's just an infrastructure advocate's dream, really, to the time we're living in right now. I mean, there's so much excitement and momentum behind it that just has not been there before. This is just truly unique, and it's a truly groundbreaking time for all of and the potential is just so enormous. It's just, there's a lot to be excited about. And I think the biggest thing too is keeping the momentum going. And I think, that's the thing with infrastructure, is it's come up like on the evening news or something, and it's just like, well, this is the condition, and then something else takes over, another story takes over, and then it goes away. But I think this is going to keep going. When the bill passes, then there's going to be the road show. And I think the road show is going to keep, and an organization like ours too. I mean, that's where we come in to put the pressure on the local agencies and to get people out there advocating for those sustainable and equitable projects.
I was going to ask you that too, Jonathan. It's been really exciting to see Pete get this toward and hopefully over the finish line. What I'm really excited about is when he starts working on it, when it's real, because I just know that he will, just like he's done with a lot of things, I think he's going to dig deep into infrastructure and really try to create performance measures and new technology and really push the envelope in a very sincere way that I don't know anybody that could do it the way he's going.
No, I think he's going to redefine the position of Secretary of Transportation. He's already redefined it, but he's going to keep redefining the position of Secretary of Transportation and the influence that it has.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, one of the things that I think is so important is that with what we're trying to achieve here with Bill DR, it goes exactly to what you both were saying, is that when the bill passes, we all need to start to mobilize in our own states to explain to our local officials and our governors to say, guess what? There's money out there and there is a focus on this and we need it. And we want people to become experts in their local infrastructure needs and how to advocate for that. And that's what Bill DR is all about. And so in the coming months, you will be hearing about ways that we will work with you to educate you on how to mobilize in your local area, how to really get out there and get in front of your mayors and get in front of your governors and say, this is not a safe area for pedestrians. This is not a safe area for kids walking to school. We need to change these things, and how to learn from one another to make those things happen. And maybe, just maybe, when Pete goes on one of his road shows, some of our people will be there to greet him and thank him, which would be great. And don't be stalky and weird. Just get out there and do it the right way, which would be great. And so I want to thank Jonathan and Jeannie, and we'll make sure that our Twitter handles are up in the description here. And again, last thing, if you are not a member of Build the Era, join. We are really good about staying out of your inbox. If you go to buildtheera.com and click on our social media information, you'll get all of our stuff. We are all over social media. We have a great YouTube page, which has archived all of our events since our inception. And so you can learn more about us there. And anything else you want to share, Jeannie or Jonathan, before we log off?
No, but thank you for staying informed. Thanks for being engaged.
Yes, thank you very much. Like I said, this is an exciting time for infrastructure advocates. So we're really happy to have as many folks join the effort as possible.